They called her the Gargoyle of Oakhaven, a stain on her family's perfect lineage. So when the ruthless Prince of the North demanded a bride to settle a war debt, her father didn't send his favorite daughter. He sent her as a cruel joke. He wrapped her in a veil, signed the contract, and waited for the prince to send back her head in a box. But he forgot one thing. Monsters don't always look like monsters. And sometimes the thing you hide in the shadows is the only thing bright enough to capture a king's heart. This is the true story of how a rejected daughter brought an empire to its knees. You won't believe how this ends. The Duchy of Oakhaven, autumn 1742. The mirror in the grand hall of Oakhaven Manor was gilded with gold leaf, imported from the finest artisans in Paris. It was designed to reflect beauty. Perhaps that was why Rosalind Halloway avoided it so religiously. She stood in the shadows of the gallery, her hand absent-mindedly touching the left side of her face. The linen veil she wore was thick, stifling, but it was her armor. Beneath it lay the jagged, silvery scar that ran from her temple down to her jawline, a souvenir from a fireplace accident when she was 6 years old. An accident that everyone in the household knew had occurred shortly after her younger sister, Isolde, had thrown a heavy iron poker in a fit of jealous rage. But history is written by the victors, and in the Halloway household, Isolde was the victor. "It is an insult, father, a mockery." Isolde's voice rang out from the drawing room below. Rosalind leaned over the banister. Through the gap in the mahogany railing, she could see them. Her father, Lord Archibald Halloway, paced the Persian rug, his face purple with indignation. Isolde sat on the velvet divan, weeping tears that Rosalind knew were as dry as dust the moment no one was looking. "Prince Caelan is a savage," Archibald spat, pouring himself a glass of brandy. "The wolf of the north. He demands a Halloway bride in exchange for forgiving my gambling debts to the crown. He expects a jewel. He expects you, my darling Isolde." "I won't go," Isolde shrieked, standing up. She was undeniably breathtaking. Golden hair, porcelain skin, eyes the color of summer sky. They say his castle is built on jagged rocks. They say he killed his own uncle to take the throne. He will eat me alive. "I would never send you to that frozen wasteland," Archibald soothed her, stroking her hair. A cruel smile twisted his lips, a smile that made Rosalind's stomach turn cold. But the contract merely specifies a daughter of the House of Halloway. It does not specify which daughter. Rosalind's breath hitched. She stepped back into the shadows, but the floorboard creaked. Archibald looked up, his eyes narrowing as he pierced the gloom of the upper landing. "Rosalind, come down here." She descended the stairs slowly, her hand gripping the rail. She did not remove her veil. She never did in front of her father. It offended him to look at her. "You called, my lord?" Her voice was soft, conditioned into submission over 20 years of neglect. "Pack your things," Archibald said, not offering her a seat. "You are to be married." Rosalind froze. "Married? To whom, father?" "No one in Oakhaven would—" "Not in Oakhaven," Isolde interjected, a smirk playing on her lips as she dried her fake tears. "You're going north, sister, to the wolf." Rosalind looked between them. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Prince Caelan. But the rumors. He is a warrior, a hard man. "If you send me to him when he lifts the veil, he will be furious," Archibald admitted, taking a sip of brandy. "He will think I have mocked him. He might even declare war. But by the time he discovers the truth, the contract will be signed, the debt cleared, and I will have my money. You are the sacrifice, Rosalind. You are the joke I am playing on the north." "He will kill me," Rosalind whispered. The fear was real, vibrating in her chest. Archibald shrugged, turning his back to her to look out the window. "Better you than Isolde. You have been a blight on this family since the fire. At least now, you serve a purpose. You leave at dawn." That night, Rosalind did not sleep. She packed a small trunk. She took no jewellery, for she had none. She took no fine silks, for Isolde had them all. Instead, she packed her books, volumes on botany, history, and politics that she had devoured in the solitude of the library. She packed her dried herbs, her sketching charcoal, and a small dagger she had stolen from the armory years ago. If the wolf wanted to kill her, she would not make it easy. The kingdom of Ethelgard, 2 weeks later. The carriage ride was a grueling ordeal through rain-lashed mountain passes. The landscape shifted from the rolling green hills of the south to the jagged, grey peaks of Ethelgard. The air grew thinner, colder, smelling of pine and impending snow. Rosalind sat alone. Her father had not come to see her off. Isolde had waved from the balcony, wearing a dress of bright yellow, looking like a canary watching a crow fly into a storm. When the carriage finally rattled to a halt, Rosalind peered through the velvet curtains. Castle Blackwood lived up to its name. It was a fortress of dark stone, rising out of the mist like a jagged tooth. Torches flickered violently in the wind along the battlements. The door opened. A guard in heavy fur-lined armour offered a hand. "My lady, we have arrived." Rosalind stepped out, pulling her heavy cloak tighter. Her veil was pinned securely in place. She was led through a courtyard filled with soldiers training in the mud. They stopped to stare. She could feel their eyes, curious, judging. They were expecting the Diamond of the South. They saw only a shrouded figure. She was led into the great hall. It was cavernous, warmed by a fire large enough to roast an ox. Long tables were filled with knights and courtiers, all speaking in hushed tones as she entered. At the far end, on a throne carved from obsidian and oak, sat Prince Cailan. He was not what she expected. The stories described a beast, a man of hulking mass and incoherent rage. Cailan was tall, yes, and broad-shouldered, but he possessed a predator's lean grace rather than a brute's bulk. He wore no crown, only a simple tunic of dark grey wool and leather breeches. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was severe, angular, and unsmiling. He looked tired. He looked dangerous. Beside him stood an older woman with sharp eyes, Lady Beatrice, his adviser and aunt. "Lord Halloway's daughter," Cailan said. His voice was a deep baritone that carried without effort across the silent hall. "You are late." Rosalind curtsied low, her knees shaking. "The mountain passes were treacherous, Your Highness." Cailan stood up and descended the dais steps. The room held its breath. He moved with the silence of a stalking cat. He stopped 3 feet from her. "Your father owes me a great deal of gold," Cailan said, circling her. "He offers a bride instead. A precious thing," he claimed. "So why?" He stopped in front of her. "Do you hide your face? Is the air of Ethelgard not good enough for you?" "It is custom in my family," Rosalind lied, her voice trembling slightly, "for the groom to unveil the bride only after the vows." Cailan laughed, a dry, humourless sound. "We do not stand on southern ceremonies here. If I am to marry you to save your father's neck, I will see what I am buying." He reached out. "Please," she whispered, stepping back. "Don't." The rejection made his eyes narrow. Cailan was not a man used to being told no. "You are in my house, Lady Halloway. You are my property by contract." With a swift, fluid motion, he snatched the veil and ripped it away. The linen fluttered to the stone floor. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. One courtier dropped his goblet. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Rosalind stood exposed. She did not look down. She lifted her chin, her eyes, a striking, deep violet, locking onto his. She waited for the revulsion. She waited for the sneer. She waited for him to point at the angry, mottled scar that distorted the left side of her face and demand she be thrown out. Cailan stared at her. His gaze traced the line of her jaw, the curve of her nose, and then settled on the scar. He didn't flinch. His expression didn't change. He looked at the scar, not with disgust, but with recognition. He reached out a hand. Rosalind flinched, expecting a strike. Instead, His rough thumb brushed the edge of the scar near her temple. His skin was calloused, warm. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. "A fire," she recited the lie she had been taught. "An accident when I was a child." Kaelin's eyes bored into hers. He saw the lie. He saw the pain behind the violet eyes. He saw the stiff posture of a woman who had spent a lifetime apologizing for her own existence. He turned to the gawking court. "What are you staring at?" he roared. The courtiers scrambled to avert their gaze. He turned back to her. "You are not the sister your father boasted of. You are not the Golden Holloway." "No," Rosalind said, her voice gaining strength. "I am the disappointment. He sent me to mock you. If you wish to execute me, do it quickly. I only ask that you do not send me back." Kaelin studied her for a long moment. A spark of interest lit up his dark eyes, something that hadn't been there in years. "He thinks to insult me by sending me damaged goods," Kaelin murmured, mostly to himself. "He thinks I am a fool." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Your father made a mistake, little Rose. He thought he was sending me a joke. But I think, perhaps, he sent me the only person in that God-forsaken family with a spine." He turned to his guards. "Take Lady Rosalind to the East Wing. Give her the Queen's chambers. And send a message to Lord Holloway." Rosalind blinked. "What message?" Kaelin smiled, and this time it was terrifyingly sharp. "Tell him I accept the trade, and tell him that if he ever sets foot in the north, I will kill him." Castle Blackwood, 1 month later. Life in Ethelgard was not the prison Rosalind had expected. It was cold, yes, and the people were stern, but there was an honesty here that Oakhaven lacked. Here, people looked you in the eye before they stabbed you, rather than whispering behind a fan. Rosalind had not seen Prince Kaelin since that first night. He was often away, patrolling the borders or dealing with the unruly clan lords who constantly tested his authority. She spent her days in the library. It was a neglected, dusty tower room, but to Rosalind, it was paradise. She organized the scrolls, dusted the ancient tomes, and began to read about the history of the North, its trade routes, its wars, its complex treaties. One afternoon, she was deep into a ledger regarding grain shipments when a shadow fell over her desk. She looked up. Prince Kaelin was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. He was covered in mud, likely fresh from the training yard. "My stewards tell me the Southern Flower has been correcting their math," he said. Rosalind flushed, closing the ledger. I apologize, Your Highness. I found discrepancies in the grain tithes from the western valleys. Someone is skimming off the top. I merely made a note." Kaelin walked into the room. "You found what my master of coin missed for 3 years." He picked up the ledger, scanning her neat handwriting. "My Aunt Beatrice says you read more than the scholars." "Books do not judge faces," Rosalind said simply. Kaelin looked at her over the top of the book. "Stop that." "Stop what?" "Pitying yourself. It's boring." Rosalind's jaw dropped. "I do not." "You hide in here," Kaelin interrupted, tossing the ledger down. "You wear your hair forward to cover your cheek. You walk as if you are apologizing for taking up space. It is tedious." Rosalind stood up, a flare of anger igniting in her chest. "You know nothing of me, Prince Kaelin. You do not know what it is to be looked at with disgust by your own father every day of your life." "Don't I?" Kaelin unlaced his tunic and pulled the collar down. Rosalind gasped. Across his chest and shoulder was a roadmap of violence. Burn marks, slash wounds, knotted scars that looked angry and red. "I was a prisoner of war for 2 years when I was 18, Kaelin said, his voice void of emotion. "They burned me to get secrets. I didn't talk. When I came back, my father, the king, didn't call me a hero. He called me ruined. He said a crippled prince could not lead. He tried to bypass me for my younger brother." He retied his tunic. We are both scarred, Rosalind. The difference is, I wear mine as a warning. You wear yours as a shame." He turned to leave, then stopped. "The Duke of Valerius is coming tonight. He is a snake who thinks he can bully me into giving up the southern mines. He will expect a weak southern wife he can manipulate. Be at dinner, wear something red, and for God's sake, pin your hair back." "Why?" Rosalind asked, bewildered. "Because," Calen looked back, his eyes dark and intense, "I want them to see the woman who caught the master of coin stealing. I want them to see the Queen." That evening, Rosalind did not wear the drab grey wool she preferred. She found a dress of deep crimson velvet in the old wardrobes, a relic of a past queen. It was tight, cut low, and regal. She sat before her mirror. Her hand trembled as she reached for the brush. "Pin your hair back." She took a deep breath. She pulled her dark hair away from her face, exposing the scar completely. She applied no powder to hide it. She lined her eyes with kohl. When she descended the stairs, the Duke of Valerius, a rotund, oily man, was laughing loudly at something Calen had said. Calen looked bored, swirling his wine. Then he looked up. His glass paused halfway to his mouth. Rosalind walked into the light. She held her head high, the scar vivid against her pale skin. She looked not like a victim, but like a survivor. The Duke stopped laughing. He stared at her face, his nose wrinkling. "Good heavens, Prince Calen, is this the bride?" "I had heard rumors of the Halloway beauty, but surely—" "Careful, Valerius," Calen said softly, standing up. He walked to the bottom of the stairs and extended his hand to Rosalind. She took it. His grip was firm. "This is Lady Rosalind," Calen announced to the room, his eyes never leaving hers. "And she is the most beautiful thing in this castle, because she is the only one here who is real." He kissed her hand, sending a shock-wave of heat up her arm. "You look dangerous, my lady." "I am learning from the best," she whispered back. The dinner was a battlefield. The Duke tried to confuse Rosalind with complex questions about southern politics, trying to prove she was dim-witted. Rosalind, fueled by Calen's presence and the adrenaline of the moment, parried every verbal thrust. She quoted treaties Valerius had forgotten, exposed his hypocrisy regarding trade tariffs, and politely humiliated him in front of the court. By the time the final course was served, Valerius was sweating and silent. Calen was watching her with a look of undisguised pride. As the guests departed, Calen cornered her in the hallway. "You destroyed him," Calen said, a grin breaking across his face. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It transformed him, making him look younger, lighter. "He underestimated me," Rosalind said, her heart racing. "They all will," Calen said. He stepped closer, crowding her space. The air between them crackled. "And that will be our weapon." He reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek, the scarred one. "You are not a joke, Rosalind. You are a weapon, and I think I am going to enjoy sharpening you." For the first time in her life, Rosalind didn't feel ugly. She felt powerful. Castle Blackwood, 3 months later. Winter in Ethelgard was a living thing. It breathed frost against the windows and howled through the chimneys like a trapped spirit. But for the first time in decades, the interior of Castle Blackwood was warm. Rosalind had transformed the fortress. The dusty tapestries had been cleaned, revealing vibrant histories of hunts and battles. The servants, once terrified of their brooding master, now moved with purpose. And at the center of it all was the partnership between the wolf and his scarred wife. They were not yet lovers in the physical sense. Calen had treated her with a maddening, chivalrous distance, sleeping on the chaise in her chambers to protect her virtue while the court whispered. But they were partners. They spent late nights by the fire, debating troop movements and agricultural reforms. He respected her mind, and she adored his quiet strength. But peace is a fragile thing. It shattered on a Tuesday morning with the arrival of a rider bearing the seal of the South. Rosalind was in the solar, teaching a young maid how to read, when the doors banged open. Caelan strode in, a crumpled parchment in his fist. His face was thunderous. "They are coming," he said, his voice a low growl. Rosalind stood, her heart skipping a beat. "Who?" "Your father. And your sister." The blood drained from Rosalind's face. She gripped the back of her chair until her knuckles turned white. "Why? The contract is signed. The debt is paid." "They claim it is a courtesy visit," Caelan spat, tossing the letter onto the table. "To see how you have settled. But I know Archibald. He hears rumors. He hears that the North has discovered new silver veins in the Iron Peaks. He hears that the wolf is not the savage he thought, but a king in all but name. He regrets his bargain." Rosalind felt the old familiar panic clawing at her throat. The ghost of the scared little girl in Oakhaven rose up. "They will see me. They will see. This." She touched her scar. "Isolde will laugh. Father will look at me with that cold stare." Caelan crossed the room in 2 strides. He took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Let them come," he said fiercely. "Let them see. You are not the girl they abused in Oakhaven, Rosalind. You are the Lady of Blackwood. You command this castle. You command me." "I don't command you," she whispered. "You do," he said, his thumb brushing her lip. "More than you know." 3 days later, the Halloway carriage arrived. It was a gaudy thing, painted in bright pastels that looked ridiculous against the grey snow of the north. Rosalind stood on the steps of the keep, shivering despite her heavy fur cloak. Caelan stood beside her, his hand resting conspicuously on the hilt of his sword. Lord Archibald Halloway stepped out first, wrapped in expensive fox fur. He looked older, his face ruddier from too much wine. Then came Isolde. She was radiant. She wore a hooded cloak of white velvet, trimmed with ermine. When she lowered the hood, her golden hair spilled out like spun sunlight. She looked like a fairy tale princess. "Rosalind!" Isolde cried out, her voice high and musical. She rushed up the stairs, ignoring protocol. She embraced Rosalind, smelling of lavender and condescension. "Oh, you poor thing. Look at you wrapped in these heavy hides. You must be freezing." She pulled back, her blue eyes scanning Rosalind's face. And, oh dear, the scar looked so inflamed in this cold air. "Does it hurt?" It was a masterstroke of cruelty. In 3 sentences, she had reduced Rosalind from a ruler to a victim. "I am quite well, sister," Rosalind said, her voice stiff. Archibald ascended the stairs slowly. He did not look at Rosalind. He looked at Caelan. "Prince Caelan." Archibald bowed, though it was shallow. The North is rustic." "Lord Halloway," Caelan said, his voice ice-cold, "you are far from home." "A father worries about his daughter," Archibald said smoothly. He finally turned his gaze to Rosalind. He looked her up and down with a sneer of disapproval. "Though I see she has been eating well. You've put on weight, Rosalind." "She's strong," Caelan interjected, stepping slightly in front of her. "Unlike the fragile birds of the south, she can survive the winter." Isolde laughed, linking her arm through Caelan's before he could pull away. "Oh, Prince, you must tell me all about your castle. Rosalind was always so quiet. I'm sure she's been dreadfully boring company. I, however, adore hunting." She batted her eyelashes. Caelan looked down at her arm, as if a leech had attached itself to him. He gently but firmly removed her hand. "Lady Rosalind is the most interesting person I have ever met," Caelan said, his eyes locking with Isolde's. "And we do not hunt for sport here, Lady Isolde. We hunt to survive. It is not a game." The tension was palpable. Rosalind watched the interaction, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Isolde was beautiful, charming, and manipulative. She was everything Rosalind was not, and Archibald was watching Caelan with the greedy eyes of a merchant assessing a missed opportunity. They hadn't come for a visit. They had come to trade up, the Great Hall, 2 days later. The Halloways' presence poisoned the air of Castle Blackwood. Isolde flirted with the knights, charmed the servants, and complained loudly about the drafty corridors. Archibald spent his time in the map room, asking questions about the silver mines that were far too specific. To honor the guests, Kaelin was forced to hold a banquet. Rosalind dressed with armor-like precision. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk, embroidered with silver thread in the pattern of thorny vines. It was a dress Kaelin had commissioned for her. When she entered the hall, the music was already playing. Isolde was in the center of the room, dancing with the captain of the guard. She moved with effortless grace, drawing every eye. Archibald cornered Rosalind near the wine table. "You look ridiculous," he hissed, his public mask slipping. "Playing at Queen. Do you think he cares for you? He is a man. Men want beauty. Men want heirs. Look at your sister. That is what a prince deserves, not a scarred mule." "I am his wife, father," Rosalind said, her hands shaking as she clenched her goblet. "For now," Archibald sneered. "I have brought the annulment papers. I can claim you were coerced. Mentally unfit. We can swap you out. Isolde will take your place, and you can come home to the convent where you belong." Rosalind felt the room spin. "You want to trade us?" "He needs the Holloway connection. He needs the South. He will take the better offer." Across the room, the music stopped. Kaelin had entered. He looked magnificent in formal black velvet. Isolde immediately abandoned her partner and glided toward the prince. "Your Highness," she cooed, curtsying low so her bodice gaped. "Please save me from these clumsy soldiers. Dance with me?" The court watched. It was the test, the beautiful sister versus the ugly one. Kaelin looked at Isolde's outstretched hand. Then he looked across the room. He saw Rosalind, standing by the wall, pale and trembling, her father looming over her. Kaelin walked past Isolde. He didn't even break stride. He walked straight to Rosalind. He took the goblet from her hand and set it down. He took her freezing hands in his warm ones. "Lord Holloway," Kaelin said, his voice carrying over the silence, "you are crowding my wife." "I was merely giving her fatherly advice," Archibald blustered. "I doubt that," Kaelin said. He turned his back on the Duke and bowed to Rosalind. "Lady Rosalind, may I have this dance?" I don't dance well," she stammered. "Isolde is—" "I am not asking Isolde," Kaelin said softly. "I am asking you." He pulled her onto the floor. The musicians, sensing the mood, played a slow, haunting waltz. Kaelin held her close, his hand firm on her waist. "What did he say to you?" Kaelin demanded as they turned. "He wants to annul the marriage," Rosalind whispered, fighting back tears. "He wants to swap me for Isolde. He says you deserve better." Kaelin stopped dancing. They were in the center of the room. He looked furious. "Better?" he repeated, loud enough for the nearby couples to hear. "You think that shallow, vain creature is better than you?" He turned to the room, keeping his arm around Rosalind. "Let it be known," Kaelin announced, his voice booming. "Lord Holloway has suggested a trade. He believes I should prefer the younger sister." Isolde perked up, smiling triumphantly. Archibald looked smug. "But Lord Holloway is a fool," Kaelin continued. "He looks at a diamond and sees a rock, and looks at colored glass and sees a gem. I have the only Holloway worth a damn, and if anyone suggests otherwise, they will answer to my sword." He looked down at Rosalind. "I love you, Rosalind. Not the contract, not the alliance. You." The confession hung in the air, raw and shocking. Rosalind stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. He loved her? The monster loved the gargoyle? Isolde's face twisted into an ugly snarl. The mask finally dropped. "You are lying! Look at her! She's a monster!" Isolde grabbed a knife from a nearby fruit platter. It was a small, silver paring knife. But in her rage, she was dangerous. She lunged, not at Kaelin, but at Rosalind. "You stole my life! You stole my prince!" "No!" Kaelin roared. He spun Rosalind behind him, shielding her with his body. But Isolde didn't strike. She was tackled by the guards before she could reach them. She screamed, thrashing, her perfect face distorted by madness and jealousy. "Get them out of my sight," Kaelin ordered. "Lock them in the East Tower." As the guards dragged the screaming Isolde and the sputtering Archibald away, Kaelin turned to Rosalind. He checked her frantically. "Did she hurt you? Are you cut?" "I'm fine," Rosalind wept, touching his chest. "I'm fine." But the night was not over. Later, in the chaos of clearing the hall, no one noticed the figure slipping into the shadows of the royal hallway. Archibald had not come alone. He had brought insurance, an assassin, paid to ensure that if the trade didn't work, the prince would die, leaving a widow who could be easily manipulated by her father. The royal chambers, midnight. The adrenaline of the banquet had faded, leaving Rosalind exhausted, but electrically alive. Kaelin had confessed his love. The words replayed in her mind like a favorite song. She was in her chambers, unlacing her gown, when she heard a scuffle in the adjoining room, Kaelin's room. Usually there were guards, but tonight the guards were busy securing the Halloways in the tower. Rosalind didn't think. She grabbed the small, sharp dagger she had kept under her pillow since the day she arrived, the same dagger she had packed in Oakhaven. She ran into Kaelin's room in her shift. The scene was a nightmare. Kaelin was on the floor, struggling with a man dressed in black leather. The assassin had a garrote wire wrapped around Kaelin's neck. Kaelin was strong, but he had been taken by surprise in his sleep. His face was turning purple, his hands clawing at the wire. The assassin was on Kaelin's back, tightening the noose. Rosalind didn't scream. Screaming wasted breath. She ran forward, raising the dagger. The assassin saw her reflection in the window too late. Rosalind drove the blade down into the assassin's shoulder with all the force of her suppressed rage. The man howled, his grip on the wire loosening. Kaelin gasped, sucking in air. He threw his head back, smashing it into the assassin's nose. The man rolled off, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He scrambled for a sword lying on the floor. Rosalind stood between the assassin and Kaelin, her dagger raised, her hand shaking, but her stance firm. "Touch him!" she snarled, her voice low and terrifying. "And I will cut out your heart." The assassin hesitated. He looked at the wild woman in the white shift, her scar vivid in the moonlight, looking like a vengeful spirit. That hesitation cost him his life. Kaelin had recovered. He surged up from the floor, grabbed his heavy broadsword from the rack, and in one fluid motion ended the threat. Silence fell over the room, broken only by their ragged breathing. Kaelin dropped his sword and collapsed onto the edge of the bed, rubbing his bruised neck. Rosalind dropped the dagger, her knees giving way. Kaelin caught her before she hit the floor. He pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking. The wolf of the north who laughed at armies was shaking. "You saved me," he rasped, his voice wrecked. "You foolish, brave woman. You could have been killed." "I told you," Rosalind whispered, clutching his tunic. "I am not a victim anymore." Kaelin pulled back to look at her. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of awe and adoration. "No, you are a warrior. My warrior." He kissed her then. It wasn't the chaste kiss of a fairy tale. It was desperate, hungry, fueled by the brush with death. It was a claiming. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love your scar. I love your mind. I love your fire." "And I love you," she replied. "My wolf." The courtyard, dawn. The Justice of the North was swift. Lord Archibald and Isolde were brought out into the courtyard at dawn. They were stripped of their fine furs, shivering in simple wool tunics. Archibald looked at Kaelin, who stood on the dais with Rosalind by his side. Kaelin's neck was bruised, but he looked stronger than ever. Rosalind wore the Halloway colours, but she wore the blackwood crown, a circlet of iron and obsidian. "The assassin confessed before he died," Kaelin announced to the gathered court. "He was paid by Lord Halloway to murder me, so that he could control the North through my widow." A murmur of rage went through the soldiers. They stepped forward, hands on swords. "Mercy!" Archibald cried, falling to his knees. "I am your father-in-law. We are family." "You are nothing," Rosalind said. Her voice was clear, ringing across the yard. She stepped forward. "You tortured me for 20 years. You made me believe I was worthless. You tried to sell me like cattle, and then you tried to murder the man I love." She looked at Isolde, who was weeping silently, her beauty marred by snot and terror. "I will not kill you," Rosalind said. "Death is too easy, and I do not wish to stain the snow with your tainted blood." She pointed to the open gates, beyond which lay the frozen wastes, the long, treacherous road back to the south. "You are banished," Rosalind declared. "You will walk back to Oakhaven. No carriage, no horses, no guards. If you survive the wolves and the cold, you may keep your miserable lives. But you are stripped of your titles. The Duchy of Oakhaven is heavily in debt to the Crown, and by right of conquest and attempted regicide, I claim it." "You can't!" Archibald screamed. "It is done," Cailan said with finality. "Get them out." The guards dragged the screaming former nobles out the gates and slammed them shut. Rosalind watched them go. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders, a weight she had carried since she was 6 years old. Cailan wrapped his cloak around her, pulling her into his warmth. "Are you all right?" Rosalind looked up at him. The morning sun was cresting over the mountains, bathing the snow in gold. It hit her face, illuminating the scar, but she didn't turn away. She smiled. "Yes," she said. "I'm finally home." Castle Blackwood, 6 months after the banishment. The spring thaw arrived late in Ethelgard, but when it came, it was violent. The snow melted in great, rushing rivers, turning the mountain paths into treacherous slides of mud and ice. But inside Castle Blackwood, the atmosphere had shifted from a fortress of war to a seat of power. The great hall was no longer silent. It was filled with the murmur of scribes, the clinking of coin, and the rustle of maps. Rosalind sat at the high table, not in the shadows where she had once hidden, but in the center, bathed in the light of the iron chandeliers. She wore no veil. Her hair was swept back in a complex braid of northern style, woven with silver beads. The scar on her face was visible, stark against her pale skin, but no one in the room looked at it with disgust. They looked at it with respect. To the people of the north, it was a mark of survival. Before her stood a delegation of 3 lords from the Southern Coalition, men who, a year ago, would not have deigned to wipe their boots on her father's rug. "My lady," said Lord Pomeroy, a man with a nervous twitch in his left eye. He was sweating despite the chill of the hall. "The drought in the south has been severe. Our grain stores are depleted. We heard reports that the north had a surplus due to the new agricultural techniques implemented by the Crown." Rosalind did not smile. She consulted the ledger open before her. "You heard correctly, Lord Pomeroy. We implemented the crop rotation cycles found in the ancient texts of the Valerian monks, texts that sat collecting dust in my father's library while he drank his fortune away." She looked up, her violet eyes piercing. "You want our grain." "We are prepared to pay," Pomeroy said quickly. "We offer gold." "We have gold," Rosalind said, gesturing to the silver-inlaid walls. "The mines are producing more than ever. We do not need your coin." "Then what?" Pomeroy asked, exchanging worried glances with his companions. Cailan stepped out from the shadows behind the throne. The southern lords jumped. The wolf had only grown more imposing. He moved to stand beside Rosalind's chair, his hand resting possessively on the back of it. He didn't speak. He let his wife command the room. "We want trade routes," Rosalind said calmly. "Specifically, the River Vane passage. You have taxed northern ships 3 times the standard rate for decades. You will abolish the tax. Permanently." Pomeroy blanched. "But, my lady, the Vane passage is the Duke of Oakhaven's primary revenue. If we abolish the tax, the duchy will collapse." Rosalind leaned forward. "There is no Duke of Oakhaven," she said, her voice dropping to a hush that silenced the hall. There is only a steward managing the lands I seized. The taxes you collected went to Archibald's gambling debts and Isolde's silk dresses. That era is over. Abolish the tax or starve. The choice is yours." The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Finally, Pomeroy bowed low, defeated. "We accept your terms, Your Highness." As the delegation scurried away, Kaelin leaned down, his lips brushing Rosalind's ear. "Remind me never to play cards with you, little Rose. You stripped them of their greatest asset without drawing a sword." Rosalind looked up at him, a genuine smile touching her lips. "I told you. Books are more dangerous than blades, if you know how to use them." The Fate of the Fallen. 2 weeks later, a scout returned from the southern border with news. Rosalind and Kaelin stood on the battlements, the wind whipping their cloaks. The scout, a young man named Ewan, looked hesitant to speak. "Speak, Ewan," Kaelin commanded gently. "You found them?" "Aye, my lord," Ewan said, clutching his fur cap. "We found traces of them near the crossroads of Weeping Stone, just outside the border of the Southern Territories." "And?" Rosalind asked. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were asking about characters in a story she had read long ago. "The old man, Lord Archibald. He didn't make the pass," Ewan said quietly. "The frost took him in the night about 2 months ago. He was found huddled in a shepherd's hut." Rosalind nodded slowly. She waited for the grief, but it didn't come. Only a quiet sense of inevitability. He had lived a cold life. It was fitting he died a cold death. "And Isolde?" she asked. Ewan shifted uncomfortably. "She survived, my lady. But she is not as she was. She was taken in by a merchant caravan heading to the coastal cities. They say she works in a fishmonger's stall in Port Vesper. They say, well, the frost took 2 of her fingers, and the sun and salt have ruined her skin. She is no longer the diamond." Kaelin scoffed, a harsh sound. "Poetic justice. The woman who lived only for her reflection now has to gut fish for copper." He looked at Rosalind, concerned. "Do you wish to send for her? To offer mercy?" Rosalind looked out over the jagged peaks of her kingdom. She thought of the years of torment, the whispers, the pinching, the way Isolde had laughed when the poker seared Rosalind's face. She thought of the assassination attempt. "No," Rosalind said softly. "Mercy was letting her live. She has a life now, a life she earned. I will not interfere with it." She turned her back on the south. "Come, husband. We have a kingdom to build." The scars we bear. The true transformation, however, was not in the ledger books or the borders, but in the quiet sanctuary of the royal chambers. For the first few months, Rosalind had still been shy. Even after Kaelin's declaration of love, years of conditioning were hard to break. She would turn her face away in the firelight. She would douse the candles before they lay together. One night, deep in the heart of winter, Kaelin had had enough. He sat on the edge of the great fur-covered bed, watching her braid her hair in the dying light of the hearth. "Stop," he said. Rosalind froze. "My lord?" "Stop hiding," he said. He stood up and walked to her, taking the brush from her hand. He turned her towards the mirror, the same type of mirror she had avoided her entire life. "Look," he commanded. "I see it," she whispered, trying to look down. "I see the monster." "Then you are blind," Kaelin said roughly. He stood behind her, his dark eyes locking with hers in the glass. He traced the line of her scar with his index finger, sending shivers down her spine. "I see a river," he murmured, "a silver river that runs through a landscape of snow. I see the path the fire took, and I see that the fire lost. You survived it." He turned her around to face him. He cupped her face, his thumbs stroking the uneven skin. "Archibald wanted a perfect doll. He wanted Isolde because she was blank, pretty, empty, and easily sold. But I am a man of war, Rosalind. I do not want a doll. I want a woman who knows what it is to bleed and keep standing." He kissed the scar, He started at her temple, his lips warm and reverent, and kissed his way down to her jaw. It was an act of worship, so profound it made Rosalind's knees buckle. "You are beautiful," he whispered against her skin, "not despite this, because of it. It is the map of your courage." That night, the candles stayed lit, and for the first time, Rosalind did not close her eyes. She looked at him, and she let him look at her, and in the heat of their union, the last ghost of the ugly daughter finally vanished. The winter rose. 5 years passed. The kingdom of Ethelgard flourished under the dual rule of the wolf and the rose. They were known across the continent not as a mismatch, but as a powerhouse. But their greatest challenge came not from armies or politics, but on a stormy night in November. Rosalind was in labor. It had been a difficult pregnancy. The healers had whispered that her hips were too narrow, that the baby was too large. For 12 hours, Kaelin paced the hallway outside the birthing chamber, looking more terrified than he had ever looked on a battlefield. Every cry from inside the room felt like a dagger in his gut. He had faced death 1,000 times, but the thought of her death paralyzed him. Lady Beatrice came out, her hands bloody, her face grim. "Kaelin," she said sharply, "you must choose. The child is stuck. We might be able to save one, but—" "Save her!" Kaelin roared without hesitation. He grabbed Beatrice's shoulders. "Save Rosalind. I do not care about an heir. I do not care about the line. If she dies, I burn this world down. Do you understand me?" "Kaelin!" The weak voice came from inside the room. Kaelin pushed past his aunt and burst into the chamber. The air smelled of iron and herbs. Rosalind was pale, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, looking small in the great bed. "Don't you dare!" she whispered, grabbing his hand with surprising strength. "Don't you dare trade our child for me!" "I cannot live without you," Kaelin choked out, tears streaming down his face. "I am not strong enough." "You are," she said, her violet eyes burning with that familiar fire. "But you won't have to. We are fighters, Kaelin. Both of us." She let out a guttural scream, rallying the last of her strength. Kaelin climbed onto the bed behind her, supporting her weight, whispering encouragement into her hair, pouring his strength into her. And then, a cry. A high, thin wail that cut through the storm outside. Kaelin slumped against the headboard, sobbing with relief as the healer placed a squalling, bloody bundle on Rosalind's chest. "A boy," the healer announced. "A strong, healthy boy." Rosalind looked down. The baby had Kaelin's dark hair and, when he blinked open his eyes, the violet irises of the Halloways. "He's perfect," Rosalind whispered, kissing the infant's forehead. She looked back at Kaelin. "We made it." Kaelin buried his face in her neck, too overcome to speak. He simply held them both, his wife and his son, shielding them from the world. 3 years later, the courtyard of Castle Blackwood had changed. Where once there was only mud and training dummies, there was now a garden. It was a marvel of engineering. Rosalind had designed a system of glass walls and underground heating vents, tapping into the thermal springs beneath the mountain. It was a greenhouse, a jewel of warmth in the frozen north. Inside, roses grew, not just white roses, but deep reds, vibrant yellows and purples. Rosalind sat on a stone bench, watching a toddler run through the rows of flowers. The boy, Prince Alaric, was brandishing a wooden sword, chasing a butterfly. "Careful, Alaric," Kaelin called out. He was leaning against the glass wall, looking less like a king and more like a contented father. He walked over to Rosalind and sat beside her. "He has your energy," Rosalind noted, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And your stubbornness," Kaelin countered, taking her hand. He ran his thumb over her knuckles. "Lord Valerius sent a letter today. He wants to betroth his granddaughter to Alaric." Rosalind laughed softly. "Alaric is 3. Valerius knows a good investment when he sees one," Kaelin grinned. "He knows the blood of the Iron Rose runs in the boy's veins. He wants that strength for his family." "He can wait," Rosalind said, watching her son. I want Alaric to marry for love. Real love. Not a contract. Like us? Kaelin asked. Better than us, Rosalind corrected. I want him to be seen for who he is from the very beginning. I don't want him to have to fight to be understood. Kaelin turned her face to his. The scar had faded slightly with age, settling into a silver line that looked like a vein of precious metal. We fought, Kaelin said seriously, and we won. And because we fought, we appreciate the peace. He stood up and offered her his hand. Come, my love, the sun is setting, and I promised Alaric a story before bed. Which story? Rosalind asked, taking his hand and standing up. The one about the prince who was lost in the dark, Kaelin said, lifting her hand to his lips, and the woman with the face of a warrior who lit a lamp and guided him home. Rosalind smiled, her heart full. I like that story. I know, Kaelin said, wrapping his arm around her waist as they walked out of the garden and back into the castle they had built together. It's my favorite, too. And as the heavy doors closed against the coming night, the castle Blackwood stood tall, not as a monument to fear, but as a testament to the truth that beauty is not what you see in a mirror, but what you build with your own 2 hands. And that, my friends, is the end of the saga of Rosalind and Kaelin. From a rejected joke to the most powerful queen in the north, Rosalind proved that the people who try to bury you are often just planting seeds. She didn't just survive her trauma, she used it to build an empire. I absolutely loved how Kaelin saw her scar not as a flaw, but as a river of silver. It's such a powerful reminder that the right person will love the parts of you that you've been taught to hide. What did you think of their ending? Do you think Rosalind was right to show mercy to Isolde and let her live a hard life, or should she have taken a darker revenge? I personally think living in poverty while your ugly sister rules the kingdom is the ultimate punishment. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more epic romances like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. I've got a tale coming up next week about a thief who steals a dragon's egg and changes the world. So stay tuned. Until next time, keep writing your own story.